Everybody wants to know what I would do if I didn't win. I guess we'll never know.
Imagine making a difference. No, imagine being the difference. The difference between I can't and I can, or I won't and I will. The reason someone chooses to wake up and strive for greatness. In life, it can feel like everything is working against you. Let's defy all odds and break generational curses. This is Overstepping Poverty with Daquan and Zacchaeus. Welcome back to Overstepping Poverty, the podcast that provides you with tips, tricks, and hacks in overstepping poverty. My name is Daquan Brooks, and I'm here with my co-host Zacchaeus Shaw. How you doing, Zacchaeus?
I'm doing good, brother.
Hey, good.
Excited again. I feel like it's been a while since we recorded.
The whole week.
Does.
I know.
Since we haven't been doing multiple recordings in a week, it feels kind of weird not having them back to back like that. But excited because we got a special guest today that I've been wanting to meet with for a while, actually. So I'm glad we got him here. I know he has a good story to tell, but I think there's going to be a lot of good information that people will be able to take away from this. How have you been? I completely
agree. I've been great, man. Today, I know this podcast won't air for, a few weeks from now. So when people do hear this, today I'm like very appreciative of life. There's times where social media, things that just kind of influence you to really look back on like where you're at and just how you can breathe. I mean, you're waking up, and that's the glory of everything. That's the blessings that you have, because as you know, on the social media platforms, we've been seeing the vessel that went missing with 5 lives inside there. And I've seen a lot of jokes about it. And obviously your time on earth is not a joke. And so it kind of hits. And like, I was just scrolling through, watching and reading, and it kind of consumed me a little bit. And I'm just like, man, you got to count your blessings. You got to be, because I guarantee you they left someone at home that was not ready for them to leave, so. But other than that, very exciting. Like you said, we have a special guest today. Yeah. And let's go. Yeah. Let's go.
I'd love to introduce him today. We have the special DJ, Bobby Peacock.
Yes.
Welcome to the podcast, man.
Welcome.
Thank you all so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Honored to be here. So
yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you for coming on, man. Like we were talking before this, I feel like I've known you from afar for years, really.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is crazy. But when you grow up in a town like Sioux Falls, especially when you're from here, you tend to just know a ton of people, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you may, like you said, you're one person away from knowing
1 degree, man.
the next person. So thank you for coming on the podcast today. I really want to jump into things, right? So there's a few things that we're going to be talking about today. Typically, we start out kind of hearing where people are from, kind of how they grew up, and what led them to where we are today. So Can you take us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So I was born in Columbus, Ohio, to a single mom. She already had 4 kids before me. And so she gave one up for adoption, or placed one for adoption. And then she found out that she had me. And so she told my dad, last thing she told my dad was that she was going to have an abortion. And so then she chose life and then placed me up for adoption, and then was adopted by a single mom here in South Dakota, who's very abusive, neglect, and house was always a mess, and just a whole bunch of, negative things that were going on. So state came into play, make a long story short, 10 different foster homes, 3 different children's facilities, and then 2 failed adoptions. And so that was kind of like my upbringing. And then I went to college for 1 year. I tell people I'm a 3-time college dropout champion.
Okay, let's go.
I dropped out of college 3 times. I got my dream job when I was 20, at a local church here in Sioux Falls, Celebrate Church, amazing church. And then, I got married through some things that happened, and got married. 3 years later, divorced. And then I have a beautiful son who's 5 now. He's my pride, my joy, my everything. And so at age 27, it's like I kind of started over. So I've been 3 years into that starting over process. So so that's kind of like, long story short, that's like my story up until now.
Right.
So
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. I kind of want to know more, you know, because I went through the adoption system. I went through multiple different homes as well. Where has that really kind of shaped and formed you as a person today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always like, for me, there's positives and negatives. Like, so like the negatives is just like, you know, you're always searching for love. You know, you're always searching for, you know, the family. Like, I didn't know my biological mom I didn't meet her till I was 23. Didn't meet my biological father until I was 27. And so it's always like you're always searching for something. You're always searching for more. So that's kind of negative. But as far as the positive, it's like I've been told this numerous times. Like I'm super extroverted. And so like people say like, Bobby, you're like a chameleon. Like that's the animal.
Yep.
Or you can fit into like any space. Like, man, I can go out to the bars and hang out with bar people, or like I can hang out with like racist people and be okay, you know?
Yeah, right.
And so any circle, but that's kind of like, for me, like that's like the positives of it, but like going through that turmoil and that strife has made me a stronger person. And honestly, like my relationship with the Lord, even from a young age, had a huge part in that, of like laying that foundation for me. And I always tell people I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for God. So if it wasn't for him having his hand on my life, I just wouldn't be here. So
Absolutely.
Can you think back to a moment where you knew and you're like, yeah, God's real?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been multiple moments, like especially like when I was younger. Like my sister from India was the first to be adopted, then my half sister, and then me. And we would always like, we grew up Catholic, so we'd like play church and stuff like that. And at night we would get locked in our bedroom, you know, and it was one of those things where we would be kind of like crying out to God and like, why? Because it seemed like we knew God from a young age. And I remember when I was in 5th grade, I had my second chance to get adopted, and I remember going outside and I was like, God, like, what do you want me to do with the rest of my life? It was like as clear as day as like me talking to you. He's like, hey, I want you to be in ministry. And I'm like, so I ran back inside. I'm like, hey, I just got word from God. He told me to be a priest, but that's not what he said though, you know? Wow. And so that's kind of like those moments I realized that like, wow, God is real. Like God is for me. And he's been watching out, even though I went through all of this bad stuff, but now I have the opportunity to go out and speak about my childhood traumas and go to speak at like Children's Home Society or other places, school assemblies, and talk through some of those things in youth groups as well. So.
Right. Absolutely. As we started here, I was talking about social media and just how I kind of scroll through a lot of it. It's actually me searching for, I'm a man that loves words and sayings and whatnot. And I had come across one the other day, and it had said, you know, when God is putting you through your test, you know, he's quiet at that time, you know, where people are continuously calling out and they're like, why is this happening to me? Or, you know, where are you? Show me a sign. And then on the other end of it, it said, during a test, a teacher is always quiet. You know, when you look back into school, the teacher's always quiet during a test, you know, and that really, really resonated with me. And like hearing you, you know, say that, where you finally had that, this is what you should do. And it sounds like, I mean, it kind of led you to the path where you're at today.
That was in 5th grade.
Yeah, in 5th grade. Yeah.
Which is huge. Like,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
I think that when people are going through it the worst and they don't have maybe a support system or a foundation to fall back on, they have to fall back on something, right? Yep. And oftentimes it turns out to be God or whatever you believe in. But do you feel like at some point, like you fought it, or you didn't really believe that there was a God at one point?
I would say I've like had like you guys know the story of like the prodigal son. Have you guys ever heard of that?
I don't actually.
So where it's like it's a parable in the Bible where it talks about how father had an amazing home. Now this is a BLP version, the Bobby Lloyd Peacock version.
Hey, okay.
So, but it talks about how a father had this amazing home. You know, he had 2 sons and he was rich. And one of the sons came and said, "Hey, you know what? Like, I want my inheritance." And so that's basically saying, hey, pops, I wish you were dead at that time. And so the father's like, okay, here it is. He went out to the world and he just spoiled it, ended up, you know, getting a like famine hit and stuff like that.
Right.
And ended up like getting a job working with like pigs and, you know, eating with the pigs and all this other stuff. And then he's like, man, the servants at my father's house ate better than what I'm doing right now. So he came back to the father and he was like, hey, basically he's walking to the father, and then the father sees him off in the distance and he starts running. And back in the day, like when this parable was said, that like running was like men didn't do that. And so, and the father embraced the son and then said, hey, let's give him a ring. Like, my son is back. And so, so I would say I had a prodigal moment. And a lot of it, the sad part of it is like when I was married. One, I wasn't prepared to be married. I wasn't the best husband. And I married into kids. So, and I wasn't the best father either. And so I felt like for 3 years I was wearing a mask, and there's some stuff that I did within marriage that was like, one, not even biblical, but then two, like, it just wasn't right. And so, and so I felt like that was, and I was still like rocking stages and like praising the Lord, but I was just like, man, like, God, like, what the heck? Like, this is where I am now and stuff. And so, and then we mutually, you know, parted ways and went through a season of like, you know, getting back into community. And so I feel like there's been multiple times where like, I'm just like, God, like, where you at? Like, but he's always been there. And like, I tell people is like, we use the term calling within the Christian world. And there's some people who have a calling on their life, like, hey, you're called to do this. But then there are some people who have an anointing on their life. And I believe that there's a difference between having a calling and anointing, you know, from looking back. And I'm not saying this like cocky or anything, but like looking back to where God has taken me from, I believe that he has an anointing on my life. And sometimes I try to run from it. Like I've had seasons of like trying to run from it, and God's just so like, or like being in a car, like, you know, that song Carrie Underwood or whatever her name is, like, Jesus Take the Wheel. It's like sometimes I'm in the driver's lane and I'm taking the wheel and Jesus is just sitting there. It's like, bro, you're gonna crash, man. There's an ambulance right behind you, like, you're gonna crash. And then like when I do it, like, Jesus is like, hey man, like, let's get in this other car, let me drive for a little bit. You know? So that's how I feel.
That is crazy. And it allows you to fall back on it too and rely on something. I want to go in kind of a different direction. You know, you got the dad gang hat on. Shout out to all the fathers out there.
Come on.
We just had Father's Day this last weekend. So, but with you growing up and not really having a father, what has been the hardest thing about being a father when you didn't have one?
I think the hardest thing for me is, so my son, we call him Bo for short, but his name is Bobby Lloyd Peacock Jr. And so I named him that because it stands for generational change. So like my real name, my legal name is Robert, and I hate when people call me that because it's kind of like a trigger for me, because like anytime I got in trouble, like, or abused and stuff, it'd be like, Robert Lloyd Peacock, you know, get your butt in here, and then you don't get abused kind of thing. So always told myself if my firstborn, or if I ever had a son, like, he would be Bobby Lloyd Jr., standing for generational change and stuff like that. And so I think like for me, the hardest thing is, the reality is like, when you have kids, they're meant to be in a home that has a mother and father, a 2-parent household. The reality for my son is it's not that way. You know, I fought for 50-50, so joint custody. And so I only get him 50% of the time. So I'm only allowed to parent him 50% of the time. And I think that's the hardest thing for me, is that I can't be there for him 100% of the time. I can be there in prayer for him 100% of the time, but like only 50% of the time. So that's the hardest thing.
How have you been able to Like when you do have the time together, there's a lot of people that can relate to that.
Yeah, for
you know,
sure.
and I know there's been people even on this podcast that I've had conversations in private, and that's been something that really bothered them as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So for you, in knowing the situation that it is, how do you maximize that time with your son to make sure that you are spending the best amount of time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like for me, like is when I have them, like I try to stay off my phone.
Yeah.
Like our phones are our biggest distraction. And so like, for example, yesterday I had them and I'm like this week's a busy week, so I don't have them as much this week. And so I'm like, you know what, we're going to have a fun day. Like I'm going to pick them up from daycare and we're going to go to this favorite spot, which is Pizza Ranch, which I can't
stand pizza ranch.
man, especially when you're trying to eat healthy, bro.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I usually don't eat. I just like I know it's his favorite spot, and and then our thing is like we love arcades.
Okay.
And so we play at arcades, and so we hit up the Pizza Ranch arcade. But for me, it's just that like that time with him, like no one competes with that time.
Thanks.
Like when I have him, that's me and him. Like it's like turning off my phone or putting my phone on do not disturb, like basically tuning out the world so that my son knows that like, hey, this is me and you time. Am I the best at it? Not all the time, but I know like from the time that I pick him up, which is between like 5:30 and 6 till he goes to bed, which is 8:30. So that's what, like 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Like that needs to be his time.
Right.
And so that like, and because I want him to grow up thinking like, man, my dad, like for 2.5 hours a day, he invested the most time in me.
Right.
And so, yeah, like I said, there's some days like I'm not, like work happens and stuff like that. And I'm like, hey, son, like I'm going to give you 20 minutes of just me and you time where we're just focused and then move to work stuff. Because like sometimes for kids, it's not about like the quantity, but it's about the quality of the time.
For sure.
So.
Yeah, especially with him getting a little older too. I'm sure it's a little different now that he's about to be in school.
Yeah, about to be. Yeah,
that's crazy.
Kindergarten, man. It's like, and I hear that like this is a time where like things really start to speed up in life once your kid hits kindergarten. There's a quote by Jordan Peterson or Patterson, I don't remember, and he talks about like you only have your kid from 0 to 5 once, and those are some of the most like pivotal moments in a kid's life because that's when they learn how to walk, how to talk, and they're taking these big leaps and stuff, and so you only get that season once.
Right.
And I'm coming out of that season.
That's crazy.
Where now, like, my son is starting to have his own personality and he's starting to be himself. And sometimes he's more like mom, sometimes he's more like me. And it's like, it's great. So,
that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
We talk about multiple things on this podcast, and one is generational wealth.
Yeah.
You know, and it's great that, you know, both your guys' names mean generational change because that's where it starts. You have to change, like, the generation. Because the reason I say that is because there's a few of us like me and you, we don't know the full roots of our immediate family and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so it's on us to lay that foundation to really teach our kids how to grow and whatnot. Now, I don't have a kid yet, but I've seen many of my friends' father and mother and whatnot. So I'm super excited for that day to come for me as well. But what I'm going in with this here is on the generational wealth aspect of it. You have your own business, right? And what is that called?
Yep. So it's Peacock Entertainment.
But not only do you have that, you also have multiple other things that you do as well. Can you let our viewers know that as well?
Yeah, it's honestly too much.
Hey, stop being humble, man.
Right.
Let them know.
It's too much. Yeah, so I work for a nonprofit organization called Collision, which is a student-led ministry that builds teams of students who see school as a mission field, and then we equip them to share the hope of Jesus to transform lives. So I just have to make a quick shout out. My communications director would be happy with me because that's like our one-liner. So yeah. But anyways, so that's how we explain what we do. So I do that, full time, and then I do my business part time, which is Peacock Entertainment, which is like video production, DJ services. That's the main two, and then it's also photography, and then overall like creative services as well. So like I've helped people set up podcasts or come in and like fix lighting and stuff like that, and so. And then I co-founded a nonprofit called Hazard Film Project, which we basically tackle difficult conversations surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then I just started a new role as a marketing director at my homie's sneaker shop called Preaches.
Shout out to Preaches.
Yeah, shout out to Preaches, man. So that's kind of like what I'm doing, and all of that, like. Honestly, like my number one role in my life is fatherhood.
Yep.
And then everything else is secondary to that. So like my full-time job comes second because that's what pays the bill. And then everything else, you know,
falls in place.
You know what they say? They say your full-time job pays the bills.
Yep.
But that, you know, that 8 to 5 pays the bills, but that 6 to 10 builds an empire. So you're kind of doing both there, which is great and falls along the lines of that generational wealth. Now, with that being said, what made you really get into these and everything that you're doing? Like, you're wearing many hats.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. I think for me, I've always been a creative. Like I love creating. I remember when I was a junior in high school, we had a class about filming and videography, and my foster mom, she was like, "Hey, I can see you doing this the rest of your life," and I was like, "Yeah, okay," because I was gonna go to college to be like I was gonna triple major, which was like a pastor, youth pastor, and then music ministry because I do music as well.
Yeah.
And like basically God had a hand on that. I walked into church one day and pastor was like, "What would it take for you to stay here?" And I just found out like that the week before that I couldn't financially afford college, like full time. So I was like, funny you should ask. And so, so basically it's a lot of it is like surrounding video and like the creative stuff. And so I've been doing that for like 12 years now. So so it's kind of just like, okay, start my own business, you know, and because when I left the church, or when I left my job at the church, because I still go to the church there at Celebrate, I was like, all right, what now, kind of thing, and so I had the opportunity to start my own business and started doing that. Started out small.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. So
that's awesome.
Very nice. Very nice.
You know, as you started that business, or as you really got into video, we talked a little bit about it. How right now you see a lot of people getting into doing video, whether that's shorts and reels or short form or long form.
Yep.
You know, we're new to this. We only started 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Really. As you started your process and starting your business, what were kind of some of the struggles that you ran into getting that up and running, and then again at the same time advertising yourself to people so they would use you for your services?
I think like for me, like the struggles were like, one, like, what am I doing? Like, okay, here we go. Because it was kind of like I was working at Guitar Center, and then people started asking me to do video production for them, and or like to DJ their weddings, and I was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. And so my ex-wife, I mean, she was amazing because she did all the back end stuff. So like the LLC and all the stuff to start a business kind of thing. She did all of that. So all I had to do is worry about getting the bread, you know, bringing in the bread. And so, but yeah, like trying to advertise and do that. And it's, you know, you start off with like, man, you know, like video for me back then it was like, man, $250 to $500. And then I got a mentor by the name of Jeff Pickett. And he's a co-founder of Forefront Media. And
are they here in Sioux Falls?
Yeah, they're here in Sioux Falls. Yep. Okay. And so he kind of took me under his wing for the next like 2-3 years or something like that. And just really like he brought me alongside him. He taught me the ropes. And then like for me, I'm a nerd when it comes to camera gear. So I was all like, hey, hey, look at this, look at that, look at that. And like, he was all about like that wealth of like, hey, you know what? Like, instead of you getting this, why don't you put that money aside, start paying off some of your bills? And so I would always go to him, and like, he really mentored me when it came to the business world. So now I'm at the point, like, I don't go out the door for less than like $3,000 to $5,000 per video.
Oh, that's awesome.
And part of that is like, because like, I want to, like, my time is valuable.
Absolutely.
And so like, I want to work on the projects that are like, hey, like, work less, get paid more. But part of that comes with the experience that I brought, like 10 years plus of, or 12 years plus of experience,
right?
You know, so you're not just hiring some random dude off the
street that
off
just
the
started.
street. Yeah.
That makes sense. Do you have people that kind of scoff at the price?
Okay. Yeah. So I'm gonna make this public, man, because I have this conversation a lot of time, like in private with people. So as I said, I'm a believer. I'm a Christian, right? Majority of the video content that I create is working with like nonprofits and churches.
Sure.
One thing that Christians are the worst at is paying people, man. It's horrible. It's like, and like, it's one of those things where, like, for me, like, I tell my friends, like, for example, like at Preaches, like, I love when they started that business. I was like, I've been there for day one, man. I've dropped, you know, money that I didn't budget on pairs of shoes,
right.
You know, because I want to support my homies. But there's a lot of believers or a lot of Christians out there that are like, yo, like, hey, why don't you do this for Jesus? Like, give us a discount, you know? And for me, I got taken advantage of early on,
right?
Where I would be taking these gigs. And I remember there was one dude who ran a nonprofit dealing with like preschool education. He's like, hey, I want to pay you what you're worth. I don't want a discount. I want to pay you what you're worth. And then I had people pouring into me and saying, hey, you need to stop giving out these like 30 to 50% off discounts. And so now I'm at the point where it's like people scoff, and I'm like, all right, whatever. Like there was a nonprofit that called me, I'm not going to name it. And they're like, hey, we want this video. And I told them the price, and they're like, yeah, we were thinking like maybe if that was multiple videos. And I was just like, that's where I'm at.
Right.
Like, because I know if I go down, then that means I'm going to go down the next time and the next time, and then it's going to start that cycle all over again. So it's knowing my worth, because it's not just about the financial thing. It's about knowing the worth. And what I tell people is that at the end of the day, like, even Jesus had a money man. Like, his name was Judas. He betrayed him, but Jesus did have a money man. Jesus' ministry wasn't financially free, you know, to be traveling and feeding the 12 and sending other people out as well. And so for me, it's just like, by someone financially paying me, what they're doing is investing in the generational wealth for like my son, for his grandkids, for me paying off bills. You know what I mean? That's kind of like my thought process on it. Sorry, I went off for a minute.
No, that's a good perspective. I mean, really because you do have to know your worth in anything that you're doing. I mean, we see it in sales all the time. There's a lot of people who sell themselves short.
Yep.
You know, they forget that, like, like you said, time is valuable.
Yep.
That's one thing in life that you can't get back.
That's
so
right.
and I tell my customers in sales, I'm like, listen, when I'm with you, I'm fully with you. This is me and you right now. I'm listening, and I'm trying to figure out the answers to your needs or anything like that. But you also have to understand that my time is just as valuable. I'm not just another guy in this business. I'm here for you, so I need you to be here and present for me as well to help you. So that's great.
That's something that I struggled with, and not in the sense of like giving things half off or anything like that, but not always knowing your worth, especially when you're getting new into starting a business or whatever it is. It's hard to have that confidence all the time that, you know, you're that guy. Right. So for you, having mentors and having people that really had your back at the end of the day and were looking out for you, kind of pushing you and pointing you in the right direction, and they knew your worth.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, not only did they know my worth, but they knew my potential as well. Like, they knew that, like, okay, hey, like he's worth this, but one day he can get here, or one day he can surpass me. Like, investing in the next generation, like, you want them to surpass you. Like, I want my son to be set set up for success. I want him to surpass anything that I've done in my life.
Right. Each one teach one.
Yeah. Just because you do multiple different things, if someone came to you and they said, hey, listen, you got to choose one of these things that you're doing, and this is going to set not only you up financially for the rest of your life, but also your son and his kids and whatnot. What would you choose?
Stay at home dad.
Stay at home dad. I like that.
Stay at home dad.
Like
man.
That's the best answer.
That's a job. Yeah, dude. Yeah.
That's a hard job.
I like that.
It's a hard job.
I like that.
But that's a good answer.
But like that would be realistically, that would be the goal. Like for me, like I'm looking at the next 5 years and I'm going to grind the next 5 years before my son is in middle school. Like that's my goal, so that when I'm 35 or when I'm 40, like the goal is like the 10-year kind of 5 to 10 year plan is to work even less so that I can be at every game, that I can be at, every event that he's doing. So when I have him, like, it's just, hey, what do you want to do? Cool. You want to travel? Let's do that. Let's, create these experiences that I never had as a kid growing up. But yeah, that would be the goal. But like anything with video, like for me, I love being like a director of photography, and so that's the people who are in charge of like what a film looks like color and everything regarding the camera. And so that's my goal is like one day to shoot a feature film and stuff like that and be more creative in that way. So. So if I can't be a stay-at-home dad, like owning my business, shooting films, would be the dream. Or I don't know. There's so much. I can't pick one, man. Something creative. Creative. Stay-at-home dad, and then something creative.
It's gotta be a pair.
Yeah.
I do have to ask as well. Starting a nonprofit, that was something that we actually looked into as well. And actually, I came to you for advice on that. It's not for the faint of heart. From what I hear, it's very tough. I had spoken with one of my friends, acquaintances out in North Dakota, and he does a nonprofit as well. And it just sounds very tough. What made you really choose that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. So my friend Daniel Bergeson, which he is like my best friend, he came to me in 2019 and had this idea for a short film surrounding a black family traveling and what that may look like. And I read the script and fell in love with it. And I was like, hey, we need to do more. We need to do more with having this conversation. And obviously 2020 hit with like COVID and then the racial stuff that was happening that got brought to light. And we started working on different projects that really took off. And we're like, hey, like we can't just stop with these projects. Like let's make a nonprofit. And like it was one of those things where it's like I had to pray about it, because like I was silent for 7 years when it came to speaking out about like racial justice and having a black voice, and like I would do stuff when I was working at the church. We'd have a series every year, just talking about like racial stuff, and I would do like spoken words, but it was mainly written from like a white man's perspective kind of thing. Sure. So this was the first time of like me really, man, like at the age of, I think it was like 25 or something, 26, of really standing my ground when it came to that stuff. And so for me, it's all about providing like a safe place. Like we live in a super sensitive time where like, I don't want to get all political, but you got the LGBTQ, you got the racial stuff, you got all this other stuff that like people just don't talk about. Like they're afraid to. And I'm the kind of person where if I'm at the bar and stuff gets brought up, I'll talk about it. And so it's like creating safe environments to have conversations where you can have an opinion, we may disagree, but I'm not going to go all sensitive on you kind of thing. And just have a safe conversation. So that was the main heart, was to educate specifically like my people, which is like believers, on like, hey, this is what it's like being a black man in South Dakota. Like, this is some of the lived experiences that I'm going through that you may not have to go through. And so that was really the heart behind it. So yeah.
How have you seen with the DE&I stuff?
Yeah.
How have you seen in Sioux Falls? Your perspective. how have you seen it change? Because it's been kind of a hot topic.
Yeah.
Right?
Trigger word, man.
Trigger word, right?
And yeah.
It was all over the place. And I'll give my perspective on what I felt when they were first starting it. To be quite honest, I didn't enjoy it as much because I felt like the people that were teaching the DE&I stuff, they were all white.
Yeah, for sure.
There was no diversity. And I feel that representation is very important, especially when you're talking about something like that.
Yeah.
How have you seen that change, or what kind of changes have you seen in Sioux Falls?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like, for me, especially like in 2020, it was like really the hot topic. 2021, it started kind of going down a little bit, and now here we are in 2023. And I feel like things are like starting to pick up even more again, maybe because it's the month that we're into.
Sure.
Like for me, I think it's like more people are, I'm trying to say this big word, susceptible. And open to having those conversations, specifically like in the church world as well. I had multiple opportunities to talk with like church leaders and church congregations about like, hey, this is my lived experiences, you know.
Right.
There was one church that I got to talk to in 2020 with the height of this, and like 2 of their biggest like small groups left because they misquoted me and said he's not on the side of the police. I'm like, I'm not on the side of anybody. I'm on the side of me. Like, if you're a good police officer, I have great friends that are police officers, and I love the police, you know? And so I think for me, like, people have definitely opened up to the conversations. I think there's still a lot to go. And it's funny because, like, people think that everything is political, which is true. And it's like, especially when you talk about DE&I to like the party that I associate with, they're like, whoa, we can't talk about that, you know? But like, I think it's it's a people problem. You know, it's like, how do we love our neighbor? You know, the Bible talks about how do you love your neighbor as yourself? Like, that's one of the greatest commandments, to love your neighbor as yourself. So how do we do that? And I think on the other side, where it's like, oh, love, like, doesn't mean that what you're doing is necessarily the right thing that you're doing. Love is like, hey, you know what? Like, speak truth in love. Like, you still got to speak truth to the situation. And so, sorry, I'm going on a tangent.
No, I think that is a good point, because I did feel like it did fizzle out a little bit, but I also have been hearing it come up a little bit more as of recently. I think Sioux Falls is on the up and up when it comes to diversity. The numbers don't lie when it comes to the population in the school district. Yeah. Where over 50% of the kids are of minority or global majority. And I think it makes Sioux Falls really kind of a gold mine when it comes to athletics, when it comes to the knowledge and the wealth and just creativity that I feel like we're seeing pop up all over the place with music and video and podcasts, just everything. So I do see changes, which are good, you know, and I do see more people of a higher generation kind of looking and trying to bring people along with them. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And I think like the more safe one-on-one conversations that we can have, like the better our society will be. For sure. You know, so.
You know, before we get into our last question for you, before we move into our next part of our episode, I just want to make one comment. And that's for everyone out there that are kind of scared to have these conversations, you know, with people. Because there's one thing that I know, and that's if you're trying to work towards fixing a problem, you have to converse about it. You have to communicate. Without any communication, we're going to continue to run into the same thing over and over again. So like in sales, I always go back to sales on where I'm at. There's one thing that I like to always discuss with my customers before I go over numbers with them. Yep. Because financially, numbers, I mean, that can make or break many relationships, you know? And so what I always ask them, I just say, hey, you know, before we move into this, can we agree to disagree and still be friends? Like if anything comes up, like that's one main thing that, I mean, if you're talking about politics or anything like that, can we agree to disagree and still be friends? Like, let's have a conversation together, a genuine one.
Right.
And let's just both be clear that at the end of this, we still have an established relationship. Just because you don't have the same opinion as I do, or I don't have the same opinion as you do, does not mean that we're enemies. You know,
right.
That's for everyone out there. But moving into the next question that I have for you, it's one that we ask every single person that comes onto this podcast, and it's in glowing letters behind you, but it's with overstepping poverty. When you hear that, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So y'all sent me this question, and the only question that you sent me, only question.
He's prepared.
And I thought about it this way. There's 7 things areas in my life that I focus on, and they're in a very specific order. So 1 is my spiritual health. Next is my mental, physical, financial, father, and then relational, and then business. Every year, like in November, I start working on like, okay, what's going on for the next year, and those 7 areas I focus in. And so for me, when it comes to overstepping poverty, it's one of those things where I gotta make sure that I'm good in those areas. We think of overstepping poverty as just like financial, but it's more than that. Like we think of wealth as like financial wealth and stuff like that. But no, there's spiritual wealth, there's mental wealth, there's physical wealth, there's fatherly wealth, relational wealth, and business wealth.
Yep.
And so all of these areas have to do with overstepping poverty in my life. And so if I focus on those areas every year, you know, like getting to gym, like for me, like I read this quote that has really stuck with me. There's 2 quotes. One is that great fathers, great leaders, great people do consistently what others do occasionally. And the other has to do with fatherhood, which is a lot of fathers, a lot of people say that they'll die for their kids or die for someone. But what does it mean to live for someone? And so those are 2 things that like I'm really holding on to, of like, oh man, like anytime I go out to eat, like what does it mean to live for my son? Well, it means like going to Pizza Ranch and eating the nasty salad buffet. It's super boring.
Sacrifice.
Yep.
You know, it's the sacrifices. And so I think when it comes to overstepping poverty, those are the 7 areas that I'm really trying to work on. So
I like that. You should make that into a book.
Seriously.
You're creative. You know?
Someday. Yeah.
No, I like that.
Yes. So let's move on to the next part of our episode here, what we call as roundtable. This is where you can ask Zacchaeus and I any questions that you thought of previously to this. Obviously, we're not prepared for them either, so we're both on the same level here. So fire away.
All right. So I had to think about this one too, because you guys. So I'm 30. I know I'm a little bit older than y'all, and I'm entering this world of dating.
Yeah.
Y'all both married.
Yep.
What would your advice be, like when you're looking at overstepping poverty? I mean, having a spouse the right spouse is beneficial, you know, to your support system. So like what is some advice that y'all would give to that, or to people who are like me that are out on the dating, you know, because I have pretty high standards. Like, like I have a list. I have 22 things that I want in a future spouse.
Right.
So my standards are high, but there might be people listening to this where their standards are like, I'll put mine in anything I see, you know,
right.
thing.
Yeah.
So
I've been with Jenna for basically since high school, like we talked about.
Yeah.
For my relationship, what's been the most important thing is, and it's kind of cliche, but I'm really have been able to be myself, like authentically, and that's the good, bad, and the ugly.
Yep,
right.
For sure.
And especially when you've been with somebody since you were a teenager, and now I'll be going into my 30s next year. Yeah, you go through a lot of stuff, obviously, for sure. Right? So anybody out there, be yourself. Be yourself, be authentically you, because that's not even just like romantic relationship, but you're going to attract the right people that you want around you because they're accepting you for who you are. Yeah, for sure. You know, so I guess I don't really have any dating advice just because I don't think I'm really qualified to do that. It's been a while. But yeah, I think that your spouse is easily one of the greatest investments that you can make, not only for yourself, but for your son and for your business, just everything.
Yep.
You know,
Sure.
so definitely finding that right person is, honestly, it's one of the biggest hacks that you could ever have.
Absolutely, it is. And I wish I went before you, because it kind of, my answer is kind of relating to the same thing that you're saying on it as well. But I'm going to say this twice. I'm going to repeat what I'm going to say. You have to love yourself before you can love anyone else.
Come on.
Again, you have to love yourself before you can love anyone else. And the reason I say that is because there was a time in my life where I wasn't very confident in myself, you know, and I was dating anyone or seeing anyone and everyone, but I didn't really truly love myself. I didn't know myself as much as I should have before seeing anyone else. I wasn't able to give my full self to anyone else. And before Megan, and I was finally able to find myself, my true self. And once I was able to do that, like he said, I mean, you're authentic. You're you. You don't have to walk on glass or anything like that, you know, on eggshells. You can be you at all times. And the nice thing about it is, as well, as when you have that right partner, like he had mentioned, they're going to accept you for who you are. And it's vice versa as well. And then dating wise, I mean, I hate to say it, but it's a numbers game. It really is. It's a numbers game. And the reason I say that is it's because, I mean, some people do. He did it. Most likely you're not going to run into just the one right person.
Yeah.
You have to really, I mean, you have to sit down. You have to have that conversation. You have to learn more, because you don't know everything about someone. And it takes a while for someone to really open up to you.
Yep.
So, and maybe it's not the right person once you really learn more about them. But if you don't sit down and have that conversation and go through that hurt sometimes, you're not going to ever know, you know? So sitting back, and if you're truly ready to jump into that dating game, unfortunately, you're going to have to put yourself out there, and you're going to have to take the leap of faith.
Sorry, to sneeze.
You know?
I'm allergic to what you're saying. No,
Man, he said, I don't
want a lot of bullshit.
He said, hold on, I've got 22, and she didn't get the 22nd.
She's out of here.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, but it is good to have standards, and you're at a point where you've been married and you've been divorced, and now you are able to really reflect on what that means, and also reflect on what you do want out of a partner. So,
and plus, I'm a package deal. So
yeah,
I mean,
you got a son.
I got a son.
Yep.
So it's like me and him. So
right.
Okay, so we kind of talked about this earlier in regards to like DE&I and stuff like that. Obviously, y'all are, you know, black and stuff. So like, what was the heart behind this podcast? I don't know. You guys probably talked about that a little bit. So
my biggest thing was, it's creating a platform for people in Sioux Falls that should be known, that aren't talked about enough, you know. And there's one thing that him and I both discussed, and there's a lot of people, and we said it in a podcast before, but there's a lot of people who are doing things and getting noticed that shouldn't. And there's a lot of people who should be getting noticed who are doing a lot of things, you know. And so that's what we want to bring people here on, not just here, but we want to, I mean, I want other people from out of state. We have people coming from out of state as well in the future that actually will be on this as well. But yeah, it's to give them a platform and really let them shine their light and tell their story. Because in any success, like, a lot of people are just like, wow, he's rich. He's this. Okay, but you don't know how he got there. You don't know the troubles. You don't know the sleepless nights, the fighting mentally with yourself, you know, and that's what I want. That's why I want the authenticity of every single person on here to really share their story, because there's a lot of people who are holding back right now because they feel like, wow, I failed way too many times. I don't want to go again.
Yep.
So
for me, we got a few episodes in, and I'll go back to why I feel like we started this, but there were a few people that asked, yeah, are you going to have any white people on the podcast? And for me, coming from Las Vegas, going into O'Gorman, that was literally the biggest culture shock I ever got in my life. Yeah. And there was a time where I brought one of my friends from O'Gorman to a cookout. And she was literally scared to get out of the car.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. It's just the lack of exposure. It's being, not ever having those conversations. It's not having a place where you can go and feel comfortable asking these questions. When the people ask, are you going to have any white people on the podcast? For me, I think of, why is that your question?
Yeah.
Out of everything that we've put out so far, the people that we've had on and the things that they've said and the knowledge that they've shared, your question is, will you have white people on the podcast? So for me, it is about, like Quan said, building a platform where we get to choose.
Yeah.
We get to choose who comes on here. We get to choose who we have the spotlight on, because there are great people, like DeQuan was saying, here in Sioux Falls and all over the world, that don't necessarily want the shine, don't want the spotlight, and I get that. But at the same time, there's so many people that could learn from you.
Yeah, for sure.
My sister works at CHS.
Yeah.
There's plenty of kids there that can look at both of you guys as examples of success. That representation that, I've been in your shoes.
Yep.
I know how it feels.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that your life has to be this way or that way, right? Like,
Yep.
you have an opportunity. So, it's the representation. In Sioux Falls, this is the only thing in Sioux Falls, in the state of South Dakota, that is like this, where
Yeah.
people can come on and show themselves to the world.
Yeah,
You know what I
for
mean?
sure.
So
Yeah.
that's a long answer, but
Yeah.
that's really where it comes from. It's just a lot of entitlement and a lot of opportunity for people where they can get out there and
Yeah.
show what they got.
I appreciate your perspective. I want to jump back to the CEO moment, right? Mm-hmm. I had that moment this past winter over a snowblower, man.
Really?
You know how bad it snowed, right?
Oh, it was a
and
bad
it was
winter.
the worst. And I was like, man, and my neighbor had a snowblower, and I was like, man, I just wish that he can come over here and help me with the snow, And I had this moment of like, man, like I remember finishing shoveling, and I was like cussing it out and everything.
Right.
Just stupid snow, kind of thing. And I had this moment, I'm like, man, or it wasn't a snowblower, it was a bobcat. Like, and I was like, man, I wonder what took that guy to get that bobcat, that skid loader or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, like he probably had a grind for it. Like,
Right.
so like my grind will eventually become a skid loader.
Right.
I like it.
For sure, though.
So it's that CEO moment,
Yep.
So
That perspective.
Absolutely.
I like that.
So we're going to move into our very last part of this episode here. And that's actually, it shines light back on you, and discussing about overstepping poverty. And so what I want you to do is I want you to share with us 5 tips, tricks, and hacks that you feel that you would tell your younger self on how to overstep poverty or just be successful in life.
Yeah, for sure. Man, the first thing is stay steadfast in your relationship with the Lord. I mean, obviously, like I tell people that like we see the world through different lenses. Like my lens is a biblical worldview. I try not to push it on, people, but the reality is this is how I see the world.
Yeah.
And so like if I can go back and tell my younger self of like, hey, like continue to stay steadfast with the Lord in every moment, even in the simple things, because the Bible talks about if the Lord can trust you with the little things, he will trust you with the big things as well. That's the BLP version again. So that's the first thing. The second thing it has to do with finances. Like growing up in the foster system, I was never good with finances. Like schools they don't really teach on finances, how to like save and stuff like that. And like the amount of money that I've like blown over like my early 20s and teenage years, like that I could have been saving. Like I said this earlier, like when I was 27, it's like I had to start over. Like being freshly divorced, and so I'm 3 years into this starting over process of like, okay, now I'm starting to get in the rhythm of like, okay, hey, this is how you save, this is how build a emergency savings account, and it's like, man, oh, you want those kicks? Did you budget? Oh, you want that? Did you budget? Kind of thing. And so that's the second thing. The third has to do with relationships, whether it's dating relationships or whatever. There's a saying that's like, you are who you hang out with.
Right.
Garbage in, garbage out. And so for me, like my relationships have always been pretty positive, but every once in a while I've let like someone come in and deter me from that. And then that led me to this or that. or the other. And so having those positive relationships and a strong community of like mentors, like accountability, and then also like friends. And like something I've learned is like not everybody's your friend, right? I take it from like Jesus. He had like 12 disciples, but then he had his inner 3. And so like my life right now, I have like 12 that close friends, and then I have 3 that are like my inner friends. And then that's it. Because the more that you get built up, the more that you are out there, the more that your circle is smaller. And so I think that we can learn from that as well. So that was the 3rd thing, right?
Yes, sir.
The 4th thing is, I mean, I'm a father. So, and this may not necessarily be like when I was younger. It's more of like 2 years ago of like asking the question of like, what is legacy? What kind of legacy do you want to leave? And so like for me, it has to do with that going back to that generational wealth of like the things that I'm buying now, like my son will see and be like, why did my dad do that? Or why did he invest in so many shoes when he could have been investing more into me or something like that? And so yeah, just generational wealth, especially if you have kids, you know?
Yeah.
And number 5, your past can either bitter you or better you. You are not the product of your past. Sometimes like it may feel like you're the product of even your presence, but like at the end of the day, it's like what you're going through one day will end. And there's seasons in life. And so understanding that like, hey, you know what? Because I went through all this garbage as a kid, that's not who I am. Like, that's behind me now. I'm not a victim. I can easily go out and play the victim. Right. But I've beat way too many statistics to do that, you know? And so like for me, I'm not a product of that. Did it build me into something? Yeah, absolutely. Did it have an effect on me? Absolutely. Is there trauma that, you know, I'm going through or that I had to walk through? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, like my past is not who I am.
Right.
I am brand new. Like even like going through a divorce, right? Like that sucked. Like I remember having a moment where I'm like, man, now I'm just another statistic. Like who's going to want to date like a single dad with a kid? And let me tell you this, like, women love that, but I ain't into that. You know what I mean? I'm very particular when it comes to that. But yeah, so like those things can either bitter me or make me better, and I'm not a product of it.
You know?
I love that, bro.
This too shall pass.
Yeah.
Honestly.
For sure, man. Well, I thank you for coming on the podcast, man.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. This has been awesome. So
Absolutely.
Bro.
Well, thank you so much. This is another episode of Overstepping Poverty. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Overstepping Poverty. We hope you found this week's discussion informative and thought-provoking. We know that tackling poverty is a complex issue, but by working together and understanding the root causes, we can make progress towards creating a more equitable society. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe to our show. Until next time, let's take the next steps in Overstepping Poverty.